Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of our Missionary Stories for Kids. What do you want to be when you grow up? That's right. This week, we're going to hear about a girl who wanted to do something really big for God. Every Saturday night in the 1850s, a young girl named Mary Slessor sat shivering by the fireplace in her home in Dundee, Scotland. Her siblings were already asleep in another part of their small, dirty apartment. But Mary and her mother were waiting. Can you pretend to yawn like you're tired from staying up late? That'd be so boring, right? Every Saturday night, they stayed up, waiting for Mary's father to come home from work. Sometimes Mary and her mother would knit or mend their worn-out clothes as they waited. Other times they would pray together or read. One thing was the same about every Saturday night. Mr. Slessor would be late. This night wasn't any different. Mary and her mother were sitting in silence when suddenly the door flew open and an angry, drunk man stumbled in. It was Mary's father. He dropped one coin onto the table and stared blankly at Mary and her mother. This was all he had left for his family. He had spent the rest of the money he had made that week drinking alcohol. Neither Mary nor her mother was surprised. They didn't cry or say anything to Mary's father. They just looked at him, disappointed. They would go another week in their cold, damp apartment without money to pay rent. Another week without money to buy food or clothes for her younger siblings. Mary shivered just thinking about it. In a drunken rage, her father threw the dinner they had so carefully saved for him into the fire. Even though Mary had done nothing wrong, her father slapped her and threw her outside, slamming the door and locking it behind her. She began to cry as she shivered in the freezing night air. "Please let me in! Let me in!" Mary cried as she pounded on the door. Show me how your face would look, if that happened too, of course. It was bad for Mary. Mary curled up in a dark alley, shivering, until her mother was sure Mr. Slessor was asleep. Then she rushed outside and unlocked the door for Mary. Mary rushed inside and hugged her mother. Mr. Slessor continued to use his money to buy alcohol instead of what his family needed. The Slessors sold all their furniture so they could buy food and clothing until that money ran out too. But Mary's mother continued to pray and trust God to provide everything they needed. When Mary was a little girl, she didn't always live her life to please God. She called herself a wild lassie girl because she and her friends would sometimes get into trouble. An older lady saw Mary and her friends running around the streets. She knew they needed to know Jesus. One winter day, she invited Mary into her house and told her about God's Word. She was kind to Mary and said that because of her sin, she deserved to be separated from God forever. Mary decided that day to put all her trust in Jesus as the only one who could save her from sin. Mary began to love spending time with God by reading the Bible and praying. Turn to the person next to you and tell them something you think Mary read about in the Bible. That's okay. Jesus was very real to Mary, and she loved him with all her heart. Even though Mary's life was still very difficult, she knew God was with her every day, even when things were hard. One very hard time came when Mary was 11 years old. Her father was unable to keep a job because he drank so much. There was no one to provide money for the family. Mrs. Slessor went to work at the mill, but it still wasn't enough money. Mrs. Slessor didn't want Mary and her brother to have to go to work, but they had no choice. Mary would work for half a day, then go to school for the other half. By the time Mary was 14 years old, she was getting up at 5 every morning and helping her mother with housework. By 6 o'clock, she was at the factory. For 12 hours, she ran a loom, making fabric. Even though Mary had to work all day now instead of going to school, she still loved to learn. Mary propped open a book by her workstation and read every spare moment. When the bell rang at 6 o'clock p.m., Mary returned home to help her mother cook and do more housework. Most kids today don't have to do chores like Mary did. After supper, Mary would eat quickly and run to church. She didn't want to miss anything the missionaries said. Mary couldn't afford new shoes, so she often wrapped her feet in newspaper to protect them from the cold. Sometimes she and her mother would whisper with awe 3 times. Can you whisper something to your friend? That's lovely. Sometimes the missionaries themselves came to visit the church. One Sunday, missionary William Anderson came to Mary's church and spoke about Calabar. He said the tribes that lived in Calabar didn't know about Jesus, but believed in false gods and evil spirits instead. They would often go to war, hurting and killing other tribes. They killed twin babies because the people thought twins brought bad luck. Mary and her mother often talked about and prayed for Calabar and the missionaries there. Turn to the person next to you and quickly say one thing you just learned about Calabar. Mary wanted to go there and help others come to know Jesus. But how could she do that when she needed to provide for her family? Queen Street was the worst alley in the city. Boys and girls formed gangs and fought in the streets. Mary's church rented a little building there and held Sunday school classes to teach the boys and girls to read and write. Mary asked to be able to go and teach there, even though it was dangerous. Mary walked there and taught a Bible club for the children. Some of the boys caused lots of trouble. They threw rocks and mud at Mary as she invited children to come to the Bible club. They even beat up the boys and girls who chose to attend. One night, Mary was walking along Queen Street after dark. There were no streetlights and Mary could barely see. Let's all pretend to walk quietly and carefully in the dark. That may be dangerous for Mary. As Mary walked, she didn't notice a gang of boys coming toward her. Suddenly, she was surrounded. There was nowhere for her to run. One of the boys was holding a string with a large piece of metal tied to the end of it. He lifted it above his head and began swinging it around and around and around. Mary stood still, watching as the piece of metal swung around and came closer and closer to her. "Stop teaching those kids, or we'll see how brave you really are," the boy challenged. Suddenly she felt a sting of pain as the metal scraped across her forehead. But Mary barely blinked. She kept staring right at the boy. Suddenly the swinging stopped. The boy looked at Mary and said, "You're brave. You can walk anywhere in these streets, and we won't let anyone hurt you." "Then come listen to the Bible teaching," Mary said boldly. Sure enough, the boys came into the Bible club that day. Several of them eventually believed in Jesus too. Mary loved the children she taught in Bible club. She was thankful that God let her tell people about Jesus right there in Dundee. But she never forgot about Calabar. Mary continued to read magazines from her church with stories about missionaries in Calabar. When Mary was about 26 years old, she realized God wanted her to go to Calabar as a missionary. Her sisters were old enough to work and provide for themselves and their mother. Mary talked to her mother about becoming a missionary. What do you think her mother said? If you think she wanted Mary to go, touch your nose. If you think she wanted Mary to stay in Scotland, wiggle your ears. If you touched your nose, you are correct. Mary's mother was so excited Mary was going to be a missionary. But not everyone was as excited. "It's too dangerous," people said. "You're already telling people about Jesus here in Scotland. Why do you want to go to Africa? Most missionaries die after only a few years of being in Africa. Do you think Mary got scared or changed her mind? Did she go to Calabar? You'll have to come back to find out next week. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out. Now pick up your note and answer the following questions. 1. Where was Mary from? 2. What was one of the things Mary had to do when she was 14? 3. A missionary came to Mary's church to talk about sharing Jesus with people in Calabar. What was one of the bad things he said the people in Calabar did because they didn't believe in Jesus? And what did Mary do after the boy hit her with the piece of metal? How did Mary's mother react when Mary told her she wanted to be a missionary? See you next time. Bye for now.